All right, well, welcome everybody to our webinar on respiratory protection. My name is Matt Burtney. I'm the content marketer for Levitt-Safety, and I'm going to be the moderator for today's conversation. We are recording today's presentation, and we'll provide an email with links to all the things we referenced during this session to everyone who's registered. We'll also be using a few visual aids during the presentation to help answer some of the questions, so just be prepared in case having those come up is a little bit jarring for any individuals. And joining me today are Mike Douglas, Jonathan McCallum, and Tony Garino. So Mike is Levitt-Safety's National Manager for Market Segments. Jonathan is our Market Segment Manager for Occupational Health and Industrial Hygiene. And Tony is our National Manager for Training, Consulting, and Rental. So we are very fortunate that these three gentlemen were able to make some time for us today. And we look forward to answering all of the questions that do come in.
Thanks, Matt.
So we will get started with talking a little bit about the new standard for respiratory protection. People may have seen respirators that have CA-N95, and so we want to talk a little bit about those first. So Mike, we're going to dive right in with the one of the most popular questions we had, which was, what is the difference between the CSA Z94.4 and the CSA Z94.4.1.21 standards?
It's a decimal point, Matt, obviously. No, sorry. So on the screen, thank you. That visual is helpful. So we have a couple different standards that are relevant to respiratory protection for us here in Canada. The one on the left, titled Selection, Use, Care of Respirators, is the standard that's been around for many years. You can see the number up at the top there, and it's -18. The 18 stands for the last year it was published. So this particular standard is a great guidance document that workplaces can use to help them establish, implement, and maintain a respiratory protection program. So it's got tremendous tools. It has probably about 10 elements that kind of walk you through kind of a what to do and how to do perspective if you need some help creating a respiratory protection program for your workers and workplace. The new standard, which is very similarly numbered, obviously ends in 21 and published last year, of course, and born from the original standard. The same people maybe formed a subcommittee to look at bringing this standard to publication, and this has more to do with performance and building of respirators as opposed to a program, an entire program. This is more how to and what should filtering respirators, and it's only on filtering respirators right now, nothing to do with chemical cartridges yet, but what the design should look like and what the criteria are for testing and certification. So this is our answer to NIOSH, which is a US-based organization that most people recognize as a testing and certification body. When Canadian manufacturers wanted to get their respirators to market during COVID, and still is COVID, NIOSH was kind of shut down for us, and CSA stepped up and created the standard. So there's lots of other differences, but we could spend the whole entire time speaking about these two particular standards, and I don't think that's what we want to do. But I think that's the gist of it, unless Tony or John have any additional comment.
No, I just want to add that basically the new standard is for the manufacturers of the respirators, right? They would, build their respirators to meet this new standard. Whereas, the existing Z94.4 is for the workplace.
Yep.
Okay. And Mike, you mentioned NIOSH in there, and so there is a question about, a lot of US websites recommend NIOSH approval. How are the Canadian respirators approved?
That is a great question. I mean, there is confusion, right, between NIOSH and this new standard. And this new standard is just our version of NIOSH, which I think I just said. So a Canadian manufacturer has the option of submitting their respirator to NIOSH for approval. They have the option of sending it to CSA for approval. They could do both. I guess it depends on what they're trying to achieve. If they're just trying to create a respirator for use in Canada, then the Canadian standards probably would do the trick, because we'll end up recognizing it for sure. If they have a market opportunity south of the border, then they probably want to get NIOSH as well.
And this one's for you, Tony. Can end users expect any major changes in our respiratory products, for instance, air filtering cartridges, due to the new CSA standard?
No, I don't think we'll see any major changes on the products themselves. We will see maybe different markings on the front of the cartridges, what's written on the front, if it meets this new standard or it meets NIOSH or whatnot. And as Mike mentioned, so far this standard is just for filtering respirators, so filtering particulates, and likely in the future it'll be revised to include gas and vapor type respirators and supplied air respirators and all the other various types of respirators. So right now it would just be for filtering respirators.
Fantastic. And another very popular question, Jonathan, I'll give this one to you. Can you compare the filtration level of an N95, a CA N95, a KN95, and PM 2.5?
Okay, yeah, another very good question, and lots of confusion around this topic. But I'll break the response for this one down into two pieces. We look at N95, CA N95 and KN N95. So those are all ratings on respirators. And if we look at PM 2.5, that's actually PM stands for particulate matter and 2.5 stands for the particle size. So actually 2.5 microns is what that 2.5 stands for. When we talk about PM 2.5, it's about a particle size, really has nothing to do with respiratory protection. It's a term we use in environmental monitoring when we're looking at a specific particle size in an environment. In the case of respiratory protection and how we test filter efficiencies for the material that's used in respirators, looking at it, it's generally accepted that 0.3 microns in size is the most penetrating particle size, and that's generally used as the challenge for filter efficiency. So if we think of N95, CA N95, or KN95, what that N95 means is that it's at least 95% efficient at holding out particles of that most penetrating size, which is that 0.3 microns. So we think of 0.3 micron as the particle size we challenge our respirator to. 2.5 microns is that PM 2.5 value, which is much larger and used more in an environmental setting. And I guess the other thing I'll mention is when we look at the filter efficiency ratings on respirators, it is related to the material. It is not necessarily related to kind of fit, form, function of the product while it's in use.
Thank goodness you got that question, John.
Yeah, thanks.
Next question is about bearded workers. So, Mike, what options are available for bearded workers using respiratory protection?
There's respirators out there for people. So if you're using a tight fitting respirator, you pretty much can't have a beard. I mean, you need to fit test, and beards get in the way of fit testing. So you want to move into something that's kind of pictured on your screen here as a loose fitting respirator. In this case, it's a hood. So air is delivered into the hood in some manner at some rate, usually 6 cubic feet of air per minute, for example, and the air exits through the neck opening, and air, contaminant air can't back up through that, back up through the neck because of the positive pressure coming into the hood. So, you could have a beard under there, and not a problem.
Yeah, that is the only option for facial hair.
All right. And our next question is about prescription safety glasses. So Jonathan, I'm going to call you up for this one. How do employees wear prescription glasses inside a full face respirator without breaking the seal?
Okay, so there's a number of options. So on the slide, we show a couple versions. So one's, the respirator on the left is a product manufactured by MSA, and it's part of a self-contained breathing apparatus. The one on the right is a product manufactured by 3M. So both, common products that you'll find in the marketplace. But like 3M and MSA, most other manufacturers of respiratory protection, especially for full face respirators, actually have something called a spectacle kit, or you may see them referred to as RX inserts or prescription eyewear inserts, but they're actually glasses without arms that would break the respirator seal on the side that are designed to be mounted inside the face piece. And if you look at the two examples that we have, I'm not sure how it comes across on the end of all of the viewers, but each of these two examples at least have adjustment, so that frame can actually be raised or lowered depending on the optimal position for the wearer. And so this is something that's quite common, and is the right thing to do if you're required to wear prescription glasses to see safely while using a respirator. These are absolutely available from your respirator supplier, and the prescriptions themselves can be installed from your local eyewear dispenser, really wherever you get your existing glasses today. The other thing I will add is that we talk about full face respirators, but in the case that we see here, but another example would be we have a lot of respirator users, so either a filtering face piece product or a half mask style respirator, where the eye protection that's used along with that is in the form of a goggle. So goggles have prescription inserts similar to what we would see here with the full face respirator. So it's just, it's a smaller sealing surface, but there can be a prescription insert installed into that, so the user would still have, valid eye protection, but also still have the ability to see as well as they need to.
Fantastic. And Tony, the next question is for you. How often should someone change their N95 mask?
Yeah, it's a great question. We get asked this all the time. Very important. How long does your N95 respirator last? How long does it provide protection? And how often should you change it out? Okay. So, with your N95 respirator, just want to show you. So when you're wearing it, what happens is every time that you exhale, the respirator will absorb the moisture in your breath. Okay, so what happens is the mask becomes wet. When it becomes wet, it gets clogged up and hard to breathe through. Okay. So when this happens, the respirator is still working, still providing you protection, but it becomes uncomfortable. It becomes hard to do your job. So when that happens, that's when you need to change the mask out for a new one. So it becomes wet, clogged, uncomfortable, hard to breathe through. Okay. And there's no set time that says how long this is going to take, right? It's going to depend on the environment, the moisture level, how much air on the individual that is breathing through the mask itself. So there is no, 15 minutes, 60 minutes, there's no set time. But when you're wearing these masks, what you got to look for when it becomes, not wearable, becomes totally soaked, that's when you need to change it out for a new respirator. But further than that, though, you also want to change it out if it ever becomes damaged, soiled, anything like that. A strap breaks, absolutely, want to leave the contaminated area and replace it for a new one. And you also want to follow any policy that might be placed at your workplace or your company in regards to change out of the respirator, whether it's disposable or reusable.
Great. Thanks very much, Tony. And I will open this one to everyone. It's a bit of a longer question. Are provinces with respiratory protection programs required to comply with every component of the CSA standard Z94.4? For example, the Alberta Code selection of equipment cites that employers must select respirators in accordance with Z94.4. Does that mean only specific components are required by the Alberta regulators and not the entire standard?
I'll take a run at this to start, but John and Tony can certainly jump in. The standard we talked about at the beginning, Z94.4, selection, care, and use of respirators, is, like we said, the guiding document that could be used to establish, maintain, and implement a respiratory protection program. However, it's not law. So as it exists on its own, it isn't law to follow. Every province has their own Occupational Health and Safety Act, and they have their own jurisdiction. There's federal. So it depends on what sort of work environment you're in. And if your particular jurisdiction cites a CSA standard, whether it's respiratory or foot protection or hearing protection, whatever it is, then it is law. But it also gets a little tricky if they cite an older standard. For example, Z94.4-02, which was published in 2002, could be cited somewhere in legislation, and now that's law, and that needs to be, that, technically that's what the law is, although the standard has evolved and good things have been added to it that make a lot of sense to include in your respiratory protection program. So, bottom line, check with your authority having jurisdiction, who is generally a WCB officer or an MOL officer. Somebody can point you in the right direction as to what is actually, law.
Yeah, and I'll just add, very well said there, Mike. It really does come down to, understanding your jurisdiction. It does vary from province to province. And I guess what I try and relay to, to customers and people that I work with is, when it comes to respiratory protection, there's a reason we do what we do. And we also were looking at, there's a current, generally the current version of the standard, as Mike said, has improvements from the earlier versions of the standards. And if we think of technology and practice since 2002, which is 20 years ago, we still have provinces in Canada that cite that 2002 version of the standard as the law, but it doesn't mean that there aren't better versions of the standard that are more current that can be adopted. That kind of becomes the minimum standard. Doesn't mean you can't be exceeding that with current versions.
Good point.
Yeah, and also there might be certain industries that have, their own regulations that may exceed the standard as well. In a lot of cases, it is just, the minimum standard, right? Just like John said, there's no reason why you can't go above and beyond and exceed it. It's best practices, but, there may be particulars in your workplace that, that to exceed it.
Great. Tony, this question is for you. What are the rules surrounding a pregnant worker wearing a respirator? So how often should they be refitted, and can they refuse to wear a respirator to complete the work?
Yeah, so there's no issue with someone who is pregnant wearing a respirator. Respirator will work just fine. I think some of the considerations, however, is that, if there are any changes to facial characteristics, you always want to make sure that your respirator is going on properly and fits you properly. If it's not, or if you're unsure if it's fitting you properly, then it's best to go back and be refit tested. But there's no set requirements as to when or how you should be refit tested under that circumstance. And just considering as well too, just wearing a respirator and breathing a bit harder should also be considered.
Perfect. Thanks very much. And this one involves an unclear chemical SDS information. What are the best practices for creating a respiratory protection program for fit testing and PPE selection when you're not sure of the chemical SDS? Mike, I'll give that to you.
Geez, I'm going to sound like a broken record and keep coming back to you know, our standard for selection, care, use, it helps us establish that program. And inside that document, again, there are roughly 10 elements that you should have in your program. And, you know, fit testing is definitely one of those elements. But hazard analysis is definitely a big part of a respiratory protection program. You need to understand what you have and how much of it you have. So identify it and quantify it are kind of the big things that we need to recognize. There are lots of resources out there to help you understand respiratory protection. We've got a little bit of, you know, a good resource here that we'll probably share out later. This can give you a lot of good information on chemical and some suggestions on respiratory protection. But if you don't have the hazard analysis done and you don't know how much is in the air, it's really difficult to go anywhere else. That's just mission critical information that you have to have. How do you get that information? There's a couple of different ways. You can, as an employer, you can buy the equipment, rent the equipment, and do the sampling yourself, and then engage a credible lab to help you with the analysis and the quantification. You could hire in a third party to come into your workplace and do the sampling and quantification for you and give you a report. That's perfectly fine. But those processes need to be, they're not one-time things. You probably have to do that, you know, periodically, annually, and it needs to be spelled out how often you're going to do that. So,
yeah, and I'll stress the importance of that. You know, this is another really good question, because that SDS document, if you're bringing a hazardous product into your workplace, or you're working with a hazardous product that you've been using for a number of years, up-to-date safety data sheets provide valuable information, not just for respiratory protection, but for, you know, any time, you know, again, like Mike was saying, it's part of that hazard analysis, but it helps understand the total hazard and what you need to be looking at, likely beyond respiratory protection. If it has an SDS sheet, there's likely some consideration for footwear, for other face wear, maybe you know, eye protection, head protection, gloves, you know, chemical clothing, that sort of thing. So it is, you know, it is vitally important. And, you know, just like there's lots of resources out there for the respiratory protection end of things, glove manufacturers and chemical clothing manufacturers have excellent guides that help you choose the right product based on the hazard, but you need to know the level of the hazard. And that's where, you know, the different types of measurements that Mike discussed come into play.
Great. And then a similar question, but a little bit more specific to the types of chemicals. Do you have respirators for hazardous chemicals such as sulfuric acid and hydrochloric acid?
Short answer is yes. It will depend on, again, how much do you have in the environment? What state is it in? I think the short answer is yes. We can definitely find a respirator. What type? That's to be determined based on some hazard analysis. And maybe I'll let, you know, John or Tony jump in if they have another thought on this.
Yeah, this is the perfect example, and this really takes me back to kind of the last question, right? When I look at these, you know, when I look at sulfuric acid or hydrochloric acid, they're both products that are going to be, you know, likely in liquid form. But the bigger question when it comes to hazard analysis is, what are you doing with them? Are you heating them as supreme pressurized? Are you changing the state? And that may impact if it's respiratory protection, if it's liquid hazard, if it's splash hazard, and so forth. You know, we help people with this type of decision making every single day, but it's important if you have products like this on site that you understand kind of the big picture, and it generally relates to more than respiratory protection alone.
Perfect. And Tony, could you walk us through the options that are available for reusable respirators?
Yeah, so there's lots of options, for reusable respirators, various manufacturers, various models, and they all are available. There's not the supply issues that we may have seen, in recent years right now. So all makes and models are typically readily available. So if it's reusable respirators in terms of protection for airborne infectious disease like COVID, I think, the one consideration there is a lot of the commonly available reusable respirators, and I have one here to show you, right, do have exhalation valves, so that when your exhaled air just, goes out into the atmosphere compared to, something similar to this, like these disposable, or would be filtered first. So there are reusable respirators as well that are available that do add a filtering element to the exhaled air so that it's filtered prior to going out into the outside air.
And from a respiratory protection perspective, I mean, there's the reusables comes in many shapes and forms, half mask style, full face style. Like we showed a picture of hoods, and of course there's, supplied air systems and self-contained breathing apparatus. So there's a wide variety of reusables, but as Tony was saying, the question is probably more geared around, that half mask, or is it a filtering face piece type respirator? And I think source control is something that's becoming very interesting, as Tony was mentioning. Where's our exhaled breath going, and who's it causing grief for?
Great. Well, thanks, guys. We're getting a lot of questions about fit testing, so we'll switch gears a little bit and focus on that for a while. One of the main questions that's coming in right now are, do respirators like the KN95 and the CA-N95 need to be fit tested? So I'll open that to anybody who wants to take it.
Yes, they do, or they should be. Any respirator issued by an employer that's a tight-fitting respirator should be fit tested. Now, there have been some problems getting respirators in the past, especially N95s, when it was determined that N95s were the respirator of choice when Omicron popped up. Everybody wanted them, we couldn't get them. Everyone was turning back to kind of the KN95, and some jurisdictions north and south of the border may have been saying, you don't have to fit test the KN95. And by saying that, it's pretty much taking it from a respirator to just a mask or face covering. And my personal stance is, if an organization, your company, is issuing you a respirator for respiratory protection hazards, then it is a respirator and it needs to be fit tested.
Sweet, thank you. Hopefully that clarifies a few of the questions in the comments. Jonathan, I'll throw this next one to you. What is the refresher requirements for someone trained to perform fit testing? And do you need to be trained by each manufacturer?
So yeah, so there's two primary types of fit testing that we see in Canada. One would be qualitative and the other would be quantitative. So both use a challenge agent to determine how well the respirator fits or provides a seal. So generally the fit tests, in some cases they do come from the same manufacturer as the respirator in the case of a qualitative fit testing kit. In the case of a quantitative fit testing device, they're produced by companies that make instruments, not necessarily by companies that make respirators. So the training or the guidance on how to properly use those wouldn't come from the respirator manufacturer. Each respirator manufacturer would produce an adapter that allows you to connect to a device. But there is, most companies that are selling this type of equipment will provide training on its proper use. And one of the things in the last update of the selection, use, and care of respirator Z94 standard was that there were some additional requirements for competency related to the people conducting the fit test. And I just jotted a couple quick notes down, but some of the things that a fit tester needs to do during a fit test to kind of show competency is really, you need to be able to explain how the fit testing procedure and why it's required. You need to describe the challenge agent. So is it Bitrex, or is it, in the case of a qualitative test, or is it a particle count in the case of a quantitative? You need to be able to explain the positive and negative wear, donning test, like donning, doffing properly. So basic use of the respirator needs to be demonstrated. So the person conducting the fit test needs to have some level of competency. There are refresher trainings available for people that are definitely doing quantitative testing. And I know Tony's been busy over the last number of years providing updated training for people that are getting into qualitative testing as well. So additional training is available. It's not necessarily defined at a set interval, but it's really about level of comfort and level of competency. If you're the manager of a fit testing program at your workplace, you want to know that the person that's conducting the test has that level of knowledge or expertise that's required for your program to function properly.
Perfect. Thanks, Jonathan. Mike, we mentioned Bitrex in Jonathan's answer, so I just wanted to throw this one in here. Is the industry moving towards using irritant smoke instead of Bitrex? And if that is the case, why would they do it?
Wow. To my knowledge, no, the industry isn't moving to irritant smoke as a challenge agent, which both of those mentioned, Bitrex and irritant smoke, are used in qualitative fit testing. CSA still allows and still, recognizes irritant smoke as a challenge agent for qualitative fit testing. However, it does come with some caution. The smoke itself is a mixture of things we probably don't want to breathe in, chloride and tin, and impacted in a silica gel, and so not great things that any of us really want to start breathing in. The person who's doing the fit testing, it clearly states in the SDS that they should be protected as well, using proper respiratory protection. So why is irritant smoke maybe becoming popular? Maybe because of COVID, there was a backlog on the other challenge agents that could be used, like Bitrex or banana oil, for testing. That's entirely possible why people may think irritant smoke is becoming more popular, but to me, Bitrex is a very suitable challenge agent, and it's safe. And ultimately, at the end of the day, we're not going to harm anybody by tasting Bitrex. They might not like it much, but they're not going to have any harm.
Yeah, I think it's been very much the opposite, where for the last number of years, people have been moving away from irritant smoke because we have these alternatives, because we have Bitrex, we have quantitative fit testing with various instruments, and they're just so much better alternatives.
Cool. Thanks, guys. The next question, I'm going to give it to you, Tony. It's a three-parter. So first part is, how do I go about getting my staff fit tested? And what is the lifespan of a respirator? And the third part is, how do we know what filters to use and when?
Okay, so I'll start with the first part of that question is, how do you get fit tested? Well, I think there's two main ways you can go about that. One is you can bring in a company that provides respirator fit testing as a service to come to your facility and fit test your employees, possibly along with provide training. So that'd be one option. And then the second option would be for you to purchase the fit testing equipment and get the training and do the fit testing yourself. And it would be really, you know, a decision down to the logistics of your staff and how many staff, and your availability to go with either or method there. So two different ways, and it really comes down to the, you know, the facility in particular as what's the best. Next question is the lifespan of a respirator. So, you know, the variety of different respirators. So I will say with disposable respirators, there is definitely shelf lives on the packaging that'll be listed on the packaging. So you want to stay within that, you know, shelf life of the respirator. For reusable respirators, you know, there is no set shelf life or lifespan for these types of respirators, but by no means do they last forever, right? So you always want to continually maintain and inspect them. And if you ever see any signs of deterioration or wear on the mask, replace it for a new one. You always want to inspect it for things like the straps to make sure the straps don't, you know, lose their elasticity, make sure the mask isn't distorted or torn or cut in any which way. All the components are there intact and in place.
Can I add something in there, Tony?
Yeah, please.
Just, you know, we've been talking about fit testing a little bit, and when we talk about the kind of that, especially the half mask respirator or reusable respirator, when it comes to best practice, again, it's a good practice to encourage that when you're conducting a fit test on an employee that has a reusable respirator, to use the respirator they use in the field every day versus a respirator that is new out of the package that is just used for fit testing. Because what that does allow is the opportunity to educate and train and to actually get a visual and test somebody to verify that, you know, the respirator that they're using every day has the valves in place, the straps aren't worn or damaged, and so forth. So that is good practice to incorporate into your program if possible. Sorry, Tony.
No, perfect. Absolutely, because it will test the mask itself as well, right? Making sure that that particular mask is working. And Matt, what was the last question?
The third part was, how do we know what filters to use?
Okay, so I think you know, Mike and John talked about this, you know, and again, that really goes back to, you know, having that hazard assessment done, right? You know, you won't know how to protect yourself unless you know what it is that you're dealing with, you know, what the contaminant is, what the hazard is, how much of it is. And only then, once you know all that information, can you start looking to, you know, what's going to be, you know, the best respirator to provide that protection.
Great.
Matty, just let me add here, because you know, we've been promoting the CSA standard as, you know, as a guiding document, and for sure it is. But at the end of the day, you may need extra help, right? As a worker, or excuse me, as a business owner, employer. And there's, you know, tons of smart people out there called industrial hygienists who are trained on interpreting this data and providing guidance themselves on how to implement the results of those hazard analysis. So there's lots of help out there for you know, the employers, and they just need to, you know, just ask, basically, and there's lots of people out there that can help them.
Fantastic. And the next question, Tony, I'll actually pass this to you as well. How do you fit test a disposable respirator?
Yeah, so there's two main methods of fit testing that work on disposable respirators. So, you know, the first is qualitative fit testing, and that's where you use a challenge agent, like a taste or smell. And in short, how it works is first you see if the user can detect, you know, the challenge agent. Once you know, yes, they can detect it, you have them put the respirator on. And if the respirator is working, it should be filtering out all of that solution. So they should not be able to detect it. So it's basically a yes-no method of fit testing where yes, I can detect it. So that would be a fail, it's not working. or no, I can't detect it, and that would be considered a pass, that the respirator is working, that it's on properly, and that it's doing its job. And there's a set procedure that has to be followed, but basically that's how qualitative fit testing works. And then the other option for fit testing your disposable respirators is quantitative. So quantitative fit testing with all your quantitative instruments. And how that's done is you put a probe on the inside of the respirator where you can connect a hose to the instrument. And simply how those instrument works is they draw a sample through that probe from the inside of the mask and count the microscopic particles inside of that respirator. And if these respirators are working, there should be 0 particles on the inside. So that's how the instrument's able to determine whether it's working or not.
Okay, sweet. And a couple of people in the comments have been asking about either training or fit testing services or purchasing of the machines as well. And Tony and John, maybe you guys want to talk to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, I guess all 3 options are definitely valid and definitely available. And you know, we're a source, but not necessarily the only source. So I think it's important to to understand the help that's available in your particular jurisdiction across the country. But yeah, whether it be if we're talking about qualitative fit testing services, there are consultants and contractors across the country that offer that. Both at a fixed location and in a mobile fashion, as we do. And then for quantitative testing, the same. The instruments, tend to come with a value. So sometimes it makes sense to own them if you have enough respirator users at your work site. Sometimes it makes more sense to hire a contractor to come and do the fit testing for you, or to go to a contractor. And then sometimes it makes sense to rent that equipment. So all 3 options are available. If you can complete all of the fit testing that's required at your workplace, in 2 weeks per year, 3 weeks per year, maybe rental is an option where you can get the majority of your testing done in a short period of time. So all 3 are very good options. All 3 are definitely available, and there's lots of organizations across the country to help along that path as well.
Perfect. Next question is for everybody, or anyone can take it if you'd like. How often should fit tests be performed?
Okay, generally speaking, it's every 2 years if you're following kind of like the CSA standard. However, other factors come into play in that 2-year period, such as you have any changes to the facial structure. I think Tony mentioned this before. It could be weight loss, weight gain, dental surgery. Something changes in the structure of your cheekbone or nose or something that would make a fit test in between that 2-year period a requirement. You also, again, you need to know what jurisdiction you're in, and the authority having jurisdiction may mandate a time frame that's less than 2 years. It could be 1 year. An FPA, for example, for emergency services requires annual fit testing. So again, you got to know where you are, where you're working, and there's usually a set answer for you as an individual organization.
Yeah, 2 years is what's commonly done. But like as Mike said, a variety of reasons why you may need to do it sooner, right? You can do it more often, whatever works best for your organization. Also changes in makes and models. We've seen that recently, where if a certain make or model is no longer available and your organization switches respirators, then you would have to then redo all your fit testing to that new respirator. There is no standard for sizing, it's just like a medium is a medium. Whenever you change make and models, you have to redo the fit test.
Yeah, that's a great point, Tony.
Yeah, agreed. That's we that's the first time it's come up on the call this afternoon. So that's really important to recognize that a fit test for a make, model, and size is a fit test for that make, model, and size, and nothing else.
And Jonathan, is health screening mandatory before a fit test?
So the answer to that is yes. And the latest version of, again, we'll refer back to the CSA standard, does provide some guidance on kind of what that health, when I say health screening form should look like. But in essence, that it's a level of reassurance that an employee is healthy enough, at least on this on the surface, to wear a respirator safely. It does the standard does provide guidance on asking some generic questions related to overall health, and it will also ask questions related to the guidance would say that to ask questions related to in past use, have you had any concerns while wearing a respirator, or do you anticipate any future concerns wearing this respirator in your workplace? And a lot of the screening is really about yes or no answers. It's not necessarily a detailed medical evaluation. It is a high-level screen. If anything is flagged during that screen, then that's when you would refer that individual to a further, more detailed medical evaluation by a medical professional to determine if that person can safely wear the product. But it is a good part, an important part of your respiratory protection program. And yes, it should be done prior to the fit test.
I think one of the key things there, it's really in place for the respirator use, not so much just for the fit test itself, right? All the considerations of how long the respirator needs to be worn for, what type of respirator it is, the environment that it's being used in, all of that needs to be considered as part of health screening.
Sweet, thanks, Tony and Jonathan. Tony, is it possible to self-fit test?
Well, sometimes people may refer to self-fit test and maybe getting that confused with a seal check, right? That it needs to be done whenever you put on a respirator. Every time when you put a respirator on, you need to perform a seal check to just make sure that you put that respirator on properly that particular time. When you do fit testing, you're only doing fit testing, let's say once every 2 years, but you need to verify and ensure that you're putting that respirator on every single day, every single time that you use it. So probably the best way for me to explain a seal check is for me to go ahead and put a respirator on, and then I'll just show you what a seal check is. So with this particular respirator here, to put the mask on, you first take the straps to the front. This is a flat fold respirator, so it comes folded up. So you first have to unfold it all the way, top and bottom. Then you place your chin and nose inside of the respirator. Bring the top strap to the crown of the head, the bottom strap to the back of the neck, and you position the mask, making sure it's all the way underneath the chin and all the way up on top of the nose. Then using 2 hands, you mold down that metal bar nice and tightly around the bridge of the nose to close any gaps around the nose. And so then once you have the mask on properly, this is where the seal check comes in. So you put the mask on, and now you want to check the seal. So to perform a seal check on this mask, what you do is you blow out, and with your hands, see if you feel any air escape around the outside edges. So if you feel any air escape through any gaps, you know you have a gap in the seal and you need to adjust it further. So you readjust it, make sure that there's no gaps, and then you can go ahead and use it. And if you can't get it to seal down without any gaps, you should not use that respirator. So that would be a seal check. So you want to do that seal check every time when you put the respirator on.
Sweet. Thanks, Tony. So this one's coming up a little bit, I think, around like people voluntarily wearing respirators. And how can we get the best fit for staff without an official fit test? And so, Tony, can I pass that to you as well?
Yeah, I think whenever possible, we always want to do a fit test, right? That's what's going to verify that we are putting our mask on properly. we got the right size, it's comfortable, it's working, we're getting a good seal. You know, further than that, you know, that's really our only method for verifying that. You know, you always want to make sure that you're putting your mask on properly. You always want to make sure that you're performing a seal check. And whenever possible, we always absolutely want to be doing fit testing.
And for me, this question comes down to, why are we giving an employee a respirator? And, you know, the typical answer is because we want to protect them from something. So it is best practice to understand and know that, you know, we're actually protecting, you know, the respirator is serving its purpose by protecting them from whatever hazard we're looking to protect them from. So it is, you know, definitely an important piece of the equation.
And I think sometimes too, you need to distinguish between like personal use, you know, out in the public versus in the workplace, right? As well.
So we are getting close to the top of the hour. We still have a lot of questions coming in, so we won't be able to get to all of them today. We'd like to thank everybody who has been submitting questions. We'll do our best to get back to those offline. And just a reminder to everyone that we will be sending out the recording of today's video, as well as some of the links to things that Jonathan, Tony, and Mike have mentioned today. So we have time for probably 2 more questions. And I'll pass it to you, Tony. The question is, are there legislative requirements for fit testing records? So consent forms or mask fit reports?
Absolutely. You know, you always want to keep, you know, all your records, you know, and that's indicated in the CSA Z94.4 standard, is for maintaining those records. And not just, like you said, consent forms and fit testing reports, not just your health screening forms, but, you know, also your training records, your maintenance inspection records, hazard assessment reports, any record related to using that respirator should be kept, you know, as long as that respirator is being used and as long as it's valid. You know, there is no set, you know, requirements as to how long, but absolutely all those records should be kept, you know, on hand for if at any time in the future you need to reference them, you have them readily available.
Thanks, Tony. And Mike, people, so I guess it's become a thing more recently. Someone is noticing that their respirator says ASTM, and they're just kind of wondering, where does that fit in with, you know, NIOSH or CSA?
Yeah, that's a very good question. We really didn't see ASTM or have a need to really understand ASTM standards prior to COVID. At least, you know, I didn't run into it very often at all. It's a different type of organization that does testing for probably more for masks as opposed to respirators, and masks used in primarily healthcare. Some of the testing that they do, you know, is definitely on filter efficiency, but you know, fluid penetration, I think that's the key one. You know, if you're in the healthcare profession, you want to make sure that anything splattered isn't penetrating the mask and you know, getting in where it shouldn't go. I don't know how to say that delicately, but I think that's where it's come from. We certainly have N95 masks now with, you know, fluid penetration protection, and they may say ASTM on them as well. Tony, you run into more masks than I do, and is that kind of your thoughts on it?
Yeah, absolutely. Like so where it relates to, you know, disposable N95 respirators, usually it's in medical settings where they're also looking not only for that, you know, respiratory protection, that complete seal, but also for those respirators to be fluid resistant for any, you know, accidental splashes or sprays. And they may be using that ASTM approval to sort of get that fluid resistance approval on that particular product, because that's part of the ASTM approval, is that it is fluid resistant. So yeah.
Fantastic. So again, thank you guys so much for doing this today. We've been getting so many questions. We could probably stay on for another 2 hours and would still not answer all of them. So for everyone who has registered for today, we're going to send you a copy of our ultimate guide to respiratory protection. And hopefully that will answer some more of these questions and give some more insights into everything to do with respirators. So thank you to everyone who submitted questions, both in advance and live today. And Mike, Tony, Jonathan, thank you guys so much for being a part of this.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, guys.
Bye.